Broadcast for shooters, hunters, and gun enthusiasts. This is the Firearms Radio Network. The bandwidth for this episode of the AR-15 podcast is sponsored by Patriot Patch Company. PatriotPatch.co.
Welcome to the AR-15 podcast. This is the podcast about your favorite black rifle. This show is for you. Whether you're building your first AR or you've been building ARs for years, there is something we can all do to take our black rifle to the next level.
You make this show possible by clicking through our Brownells and Amazon affiliate links. The next time you order online, go to AR15podcast.com and click through our Brownells and Amazon affiliate links. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and a small portion of your sale goes to supporting pro-gun radio like the AR-15 podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the AR-15 podcast. Tonight's episode number 168. So in this episode, we're going to be talking to Bob Mayne about the AR-15 in an SHTF scenario. And so before we get started, JD, why don't you tell the listeners about the network news that we have up here?
We have an NRA show meetup. It is the 21st of May at 7 o'clock at Cardinal Hall of Fame in Louisville. And the NRA, the group from the Firearms Radio Network, is going to be there. Reed, I'm going to let you... I'm going to attempt this week. Jake tells us if they can say ambidextrous. Did I get that right, Reed?
You did, absolutely.
As well, I'll buy them a drink. That's what Jake, the president of the Firearms Radio Network, says. So, ambidextrous. Remember that one.
That is what is that? The Illinoisian pronunciation of ambidextrous?
Illinoisian. That's pretty good. That's good.
Reed, what have you been up to?
Well,
last week.
You know, I've been kind of clearing the desk of some things that have been delayed as I get my professional obligations otherwise under control. And I got myself an Aero Precision optic mount so that I could put my new Bushnell optic on there. I got a great deal out of Palmetto State Armory. And the two mounted quite nicely on my rifle, so I'm gonna get out to the range and see if I can't get it all sighted in sometime here in the next 2 or 3 days. But that's basically what I've been up to.
All right, I'm going to ask our guest, Bob Mayne. Bob, thanks for joining us today. What have you done in the last week, firearms related?
Well, gentlemen, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate that. What have I done firearms related in the last week? How about just a little over a week ago? Ben Branham and I taught a 2-day defensive handgun class in Houston. We taught our advanced level of our Beyond Concealed Carry class, and that was a lot of fun. And got some ammo, and I'm getting prepared. I'm stocking up on 223 and 5.56 for an AR M4 class I'm taking middle of May.
That sounds awesome.
Oh yeah, that's I'm looking forward to that.
I think I want to trade lives with you.
Well, now I don't do that full time, but you just kind of happened to ask me a week and a half after not even that, 9 days after we finished up a defensive handgun class. That's our alternative source of income, I guess. It really just pays for our hobby, to be honest with you.
Well, you gotta like that.
Oh yeah, what's that?
I don't have anything that pays for my hobby.
I call it ammo money.
Yeah.
That must be nice. Well, guys, I didn't get to do anything really firearms related except it was like Christmas at my house on Saturday. Several packages showed up at the front door, and they were all marked Otis Technology. Want to thank Otis Technology for partnering up with the AR-15 podcast again for 2016. We've got some cool ideas coming up for the. Can you believe we're almost halfway through the year?
Oh yeah.
So we've got some pretty cool stuff coming up. So we've got some cleaning kits and their new flugs ear protection that are custom to your ear, moldable. So that's all I did. I just sorted that stuff and make sure everything was there that was supposed to be there.
I need some of those.
They're nice. They're really nice.
I need those.
Yeah, we saw them at SHOT Show. They just, they open up the cup, take the earplugs out, pour a little water, put it in the microwave. It just takes minutes to have that custom ear protection for when you're out shooting. So
Really?
we'll be talking more about those here in the next coming weeks. Also want to let you guys know the New Frontier Armory 9mm carbine giveaway is in full swing. We're almost halfway, and I've talked to Robert over at RTT Cerakote there. The gun is being sandblasted as we speak. They're going to do a nice Cerakote job and get it all nice and pretty. We hope to have some pictures here in the next couple of days to share with you guys on Facebook and Instagram. You can sign up by going to any of the show notes of the last couple of shows. The giveaway will end on May 31st. You can go to facebook.com/AR-15 podcast and find out more about the giveaway. And we just featured David from New Frontier Armory talking about the show on the last episode, which I believe was 166 or a couple episodes back. So you can check that out, download that on iTunes, and man, a great chance to get one of these 9mm carbines from New Frontier Armory for absolutely nothing if you put the proper name in the sign up. We're not transferring it to Whiskey Bravo. We're not transferring it to Joe MF or whatever. So make sure you use your real name, guys. It would suck if your name got pulled and we had to go to the next one because you decided to get a laugh. So check that out. Facebook.com/AR-15 podcast or any of the show notes from the recent shows.
All right. Well, Bob, thank you for joining us. We understand that you have quite a deep resume of podcasts in your own right. And the two podcasts that you basically host and run are Today's Survival podcast.
Yeah, Today's Survival Show. That's one.
And Handgun World.
Handgun World podcast.
So those two podcasts basically contain an enormous depth of information and resource for any of the listeners that want to go out and get a sense of Bob's expertise and what he's trying to provide to his listeners, which is just phenomenal source information. But you have got us beat hands down in terms of content by like a factor of 8 to 1 for every show we have out there.
Well, I've been doing it almost 7 years now.
Well, we're excited to have you come on and just kind of share with us some of your thoughts and some of the musings that have crossed your table in those 7 years. And as they relate to the AR-15. So I kind of want to start out with, what are some of the real-world things that concern your listeners, that concern a prepper or a survivalist, and what are those things going to look like?
Well, I want to talk about this not just from a prepper and a modern survival perspective, but how about just an ordinary civilian perspective as well? Is that okay?
All right. I think that's fine. That's perfect.
Even though a lot of preppers are also ordinary civilians. Here's what I think is going on. I think you would have to be sleeping under a rock, literally, to not understand that there's a threat out there. And the threat doesn't just come from a crack dealer that wants to steal your wallet. The threat also, I think, comes from factions, so to speak, of people that don't like us. And when I say don't like us, liberty-loving, small government type of people that believe that we're headed in the wrong direction. So a lot of people that don't like us.
Right.
And I think that people need to prepare themselves. And I think an AR-15 is, well, we all know it's America's rifle. It's something everybody should have at least one. And there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons for that, and it's one of the reasons why those are the only long guns I own. I have 2 of them, and it's the only long guns I own, and it's really the only ones that I believe in that people that must have as part of their self-defense.
So in terms of the situations where you think an AR-15 is going to be applicable in that situation, are there any kind of broad brushstroke pictures that, thumbnail pictures that you can paint for us?
I like to call it a get off my lawn gun. And that kind of pretty much explains it. You mean when you say a broad brush, do you mean like what are some of the most common reasons we should have one or something like that, or what?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of scenarios, I think everybody has this kind of the self-oriented view of what concerns them. While one guy might be concerned that, economic disaster might hit, or someone says, I don't want to be in the middle of another Katrina. Someone else is worried about, the flu bug or whatever it is, or someone else is worried about, I don't know, intrusion by the government into a life that, otherwise they don't feel should be intruded upon.
Right.
When we talk about the big ticket items, the ones that get the most, I guess, floor space, the most time from your listeners, what are the ones that concern everybody the most?
It seems to me like people are mostly concerned with probably a governmental collapse. And not a full collapse. I think you guys know who Glenn Tate is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I've had Glenn on both of my podcasts interviewing before. I've had him on the Handgun World podcast and today's Survival Show, and he's talked about, his book series, and I'm not here to pitch that, but, he talks about a partial collapse, and I think that's in the minds, especially today with our political climate, with our economic climate. I think that's on the minds of a lot of Americans. I think it's on the minds of more Americans than those that want to admit it.
So, are there any that you feel are just fantastical enough to not, that they shouldn't take center stage? I think the one that always occurs to me is like the solar flare. That's a little too fantastical for me to say. The 1 in a billion, trillion, whatever chance that, we're going to die in a solar flare. Or, I think a riot is far more likely than
exactly.
that.
Or an EMP is what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah, those you just hit the nail on the head, Reed. That's something that I think is so far-fetched. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I think it's just way too far-fetched. I think that, let me give you my approach. My approach is, if we have a natural disaster, I think we can all think back to 2005 when Katrina hit, when Hurricane Katrina hit, or even if you go back farther than that, the Rodney King riots. Right. There's a very real possibility that things like that can and will happen again. And sometimes a handgun's just not enough. On my Handgun World podcast, I talk a lot about how handguns really suck in terms of their defensive power and their stopping power. I just took a class taught by Tom Givens on defensive handgun, and he spent a lot of time talking about how they really do suck in terms of stopping power. So you need to have a long gun, and my favorite long gun is the AR-15 for a lot of reasons. It's easy to shoot. It's easy for people to learn how to shoot, and I've rarely put one in somebody's hands that didn't have a big smile on their face after the first magazine.
So, we kind of talked before the show in terms of the idea that I think are broadly espoused. One is the Bugout, where you basically adopt, I guess, a mindset, a viewpoint of flexibility, mobility, portability in terms of all of the things that you're evaluating. And then there's the other idea of kind of sheltering in place. And, certainly nobody can predict what calamity is going to face you at any given time, so you have to be able to be adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of those two ideas, is there anything about the AR-15 as a choice, as a platform that's incorporated into your mindset that is going to be different one from the other? If you're going to talk about portability, ammunition, storage. Why don't we just kind of take those, A and B, as far as considerations for the AR. So if you're going to be the Bugout guy, what are you thinking in terms of your AR?
Well, I'm thinking of portability, and I'm thinking of weight and lightweight. And one of the reasons I like the AR, the M4, is because the ammo is light. You know, you can carry several magazines of 223 or 5.56 ammo, and it doesn't really weigh all that much. And so that's, you know, portability, I think, is everything. You know, my favorite AR M4 that I have is it's relatively small in size. It's a 14.5-inch barrel with a 2-inch flash hider on it to make it legal, and it's a relatively short. It's not a big clunky AR-15, and I like that, and I think that's very important. And shootability, you know, they're so easy to shoot. They don't recoil much. It's easy for people. And here's the other thing you have to realize: if the stink hits the fan, okay, you might have to hand your AR or another AR off to somebody else, and you might have to say, here, take this and help me defend our property. And this could be a person that's not real familiar with shooting rifles and long guns, and maybe they don't have a whole lot of experience. Maybe they're a recoil-sensitive person. That's where the AR really shines, I think, is because it's not going to beat them up that much.
So in terms of the idea of portability, there is something that really kind of, I think, skirts the edge of a lot of the conversations we have, because we have this whole segment of the population that get these AR pistols because the pistol is legal in their environment. However, they may not be able to get an SBR tax stamp in their state, or they may be unwilling to, you know, get on the radar screen of the federal government, or for whatever reason. So in terms of a bug-out situation, do you think that there's room for the pistol that's going to suddenly become a short-barreled rifle? Because, you know, I think for all practical purposes, if we're talking the total collapse of, you know, civilization, there is nobody there to slap your wrist or send you to a federal penitentiary if you do cross that line. So do you think that in terms of a mindset that should be incorporated, the willful, I guess, disobedience of a law that at that time probably wouldn't have any impact at all?
Not really, and here's why I say that. A complete and total collapse to where there's no laws enforced at all, I think that's highly unlikely. I really do. I don't think that should be the number one thing on someone's list to get ready for. And notice I said a total collapse. I think that's unlikely. A partial collapse, I think, is very likely. But I think there's still going to be laws that are going to be enforced even in a partial collapse. I am not a huge fan of AR pistols, and I hope I don't rub people the wrong way saying that. Maybe I do, but I'm not a big fan of them. And you want to know why? I'm not that big on them. They're loud. Yes, they're portable, but they're loud. They're not legal in every state. And you know, you could get something like a Ruger 5.56 takedown and make it just as portable as an AR pistol, and that thing goes together quickly. I've seen it done, and it goes together, and you can shoot it within less than a minute of pulling it out of your bag.
Well, we want to let you know that our last in the last week or two, we did an episode about the AR-15 pistol. We really kind of agreed with you on every point. We didn't take all that much care to defend the pistol.
Yeah, well, good. So we agree on that. I'm not a big fan of them. I mean, they're kind of the sexy thing for people to buy when it comes to ARs, you know. And I think a lot of manufacturers made a lot of money selling AR pistols. But I think in the reality of the situation, you know, the idea that you're going to be able to reach into the trunk of your car and take that rifle out, or the pistol, or reach under the seat of your truck and pull that rifle out and start shooting, it's not real likely. And I think the handgun you have on your person, or if you're defending your homestead, the AR that is the rifle that is closely that's close to you, that's easy to get to, that's the more likely scenario.
So in terms of the bug-out situation, is the AR-15 part of a much larger set of considerations when you're arming yourself? You know, I'm a fan of the idea that I would have a pistol as well as a rifle. that I would carry a sufficient load at any given time to meet whatever my base requirements are. How do you see kind of those considerations fitting into a broader discussion of the AR-15 in a bug-out situation?
Well, I think everybody needs to have at least one in a bug-out or a bug-in situation, and I'm much more of a fan of bugging in. I'm much more of a fan of staying home where I know the area, where I have supplies, and I'm much more of a fan of staying in and defending myself, my family, and my homestead. I would rather not leave. You know, leaving is my last option because I'm limited. Once I leave, I'm limited to what I can take with me in my vehicle pretty much.
When vehicles can, you can be compelled to leave your vehicle sometimes a lot easier than your home.
And okay, in that situation, maybe an AR pistol would have an advantage, but you know, you can set up some ARs. I got an AR sitting here right next to me, that the one I just described a few minutes ago. It's very, very portable. I mean, I can't see why I couldn't sling this thing on my shoulder and leave my vehicle with it. I could carry it for a long time. It's pretty lightweight.
Yeah, well, and I would agree with you. There's nothing that would compel me to go towards an AR-15 pistol if I was in that situation. I would much rather have the platform in its originally intended design to allow me to utilize it in the exact way that it was intended.
And there you go. You guys were gracious enough to invite me as a guest, and now I've probably ticked off a big portion of your listeners. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no. I don't think you have it all.
Oh, okay. All right.
So in terms of the rifle, I mean, you and I spoke a little bit earlier, and I think a lot of people would understand this inherently. You know, the 5.56 is a caliber is a much lighter projectile than say a .308, and so carrying like a M14 or an M1A is not the same as carrying an AR and an equivalent number of rounds in terms of total weight. So. Is there anything else about the AR that really lends itself to a bug-out situation that you've come across in your travels?
Yeah. You know, first of all, ammo for the AR is available just about everywhere. And I'm not talking about when we had the ammo shortage a few years ago. I'm talking about right now. I think you could walk into just about any gun store, any sporting goods store, and you could buy either 223, 5.56, 308. Some of the other calibers might not be quite as plentiful. And so I like that. The other thing is you can get parts. You can get parts for ARs just about anywhere. And it's also fairly easy for the average citizen to learn how to change out parts on their AR. They're so modular and they're so easy to work on. Even a dummy like me can figure it out. And I'm not very technical, but I can figure out a lot of things about my AR, just by reading stuff and watching people that are better at it on YouTube take apart and put their ARs back together.
Right. Well, I think we've got a pretty good kind of understanding of the AR and the bug-out situation, but of course we have, the hunker down, what do you call it, bug-out in place, or?
Yeah.
I know I said it just a minute ago.
Bug in.
Bug in, yeah. So in terms of the bug in, of course, a lot of the things that we've discussed in the bug-out situation may have impact, have relevance, but aside from things like the ease of repair, ammo, availability of parts, when you're talking about being at home, is there anything about the AR-15's performance, its abilities that lend itself in that situation in a much better way than, say, another choice?
Yeah, sure, there is. Contrary to popular belief, I haven't tested this myself, but I've seen a lot of very good firearms experts test this. The 223 5.56 is less likely, and I'm going to repeat this, less likely to penetrate drywall and to penetrate walls in your house than a .40 caliber handgun.
I think that's a pretty interesting phenomenon. Now, we have a listener that wrote in about a LA County Sheriff's Department evaluation that looked at the AR-15 and the 223 and came to the conclusion that a standard what was it, 55 grain soft point is the ideal in, I guess, a room-to-room kind of caliber, or I mean a projectile, simply because the soft point allows it to really bleed off a whole lot of its energy before it would penetrate through a wall, and makes them, I guess, lethal enough for the purpose. So.
Well, Reed, you brought up home defense earlier, and I wanted to say something else about it. Here's one of the things I like about the AR and the M4. And I say this all the time on my Handgun World podcast. All the time. I say this all the time about handguns because I truly believe it, and I believe the same about long guns and ARs. Whatever you choose, you have to be willing to shoot it, and you have to be willing to shoot it a lot, and you have to be willing to train with it, and you have to like to shoot it. People say, oh, well, I got this bolt action 308 and I can shoot out to 700 yards. Yeah, but how about if you go take a 600 round course with your bolt action 308 and tell me what your shoulder feels like by the end of the weekend? But go train with your AR and you're probably going to be just fine after a couple of days. They don't beat you up as much. People enjoy shooting ARs. They love to shoot them. They like to train with them. They're easy to shoot, and guess what? That's going to make you better with it when and if that time comes that you have to use it.
That leads me to a question in terms of training. I went through pretty standardized military training at a time that they could, spend some of that time on the training. There wasn't a need to get us shipped out someplace.
Yeah.
And I've continued to maintain my proficiencies in a number of areas with the rifle, but I have enough rifles that I shoot at various times that I wouldn't say that there is one rifle like the one I was issued in the Marine Corps that I know everything about, that I can pick it up and dial it in and I can be on no matter what. Do you think that there's a point at which you have too many, or that it's okay to have too many, but you should have one that is designated as your primary?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I only own two. You're talking about ARs, right?
Right.
Okay, I only have two, and one is designated as my primary, and the other is my secondary. And I'm going to train with both in the class in a few weeks. But yeah, I think you should dedicate one as your primary, get used to it, get to know it, shoot it like crazy, take it apart, put it back together, change parts on it, put parts on, on and off. Just clean it 15 times in 60 days so that you know how to do it. And yeah, it should be. You should have one primary.
Reed, you just asked me to choose between my kids.
I didn't ask you to choose between them. I just asked you to line them up and call one of them your favorite.
Yeah, if I lined them all up and said which one of you are my primary, I'm saying all of you are. I mean, I don't think I can choose.
Well, you know what? I thought that too, but it's kind of like handguns. I'm a big believer that with a handgun, you need to pick one or two as your primary, use the other for recreation and having fun, but pick one or two as your primary and learn to get good with it. Same thing with a rifle.
Well, I can't disagree with you there.
JD, you're probably not going to pick up your kids for self-defense and use them to defend your homestead. So yeah, get used to one of them. Get used to one of your rifles.
He hasn't met my kids yet, has he?
Oh, okay. I'm making a bold assumption. Sorry.
So in terms of the bug-in, is there anything else that you think comes into the consideration when we're talking about the AR-15?
Bugging out?
No, bugging in.
Oh. Well, yeah. A lot of ammo in a magazine. For years, the 12-gauge shotgun was like the gold standard for a home defense weapon, and I think we're moving away from that now because most of them you can only put 6 to 8 shells in them. They kick like a mule. They're unpleasant to shoot, especially when you load them up with double-aught buck. And if you're a little guy like me, they're just not a whole lot of fun to shoot. And after about 3 or 4 shots with a 12-gauge pump, you're like, forget this. But the AR, I can pack well, I like to download my mags to 28, so I can pack 28 rounds in a mag, and that gives me a lot of firepower if I have to defend my homestead before I even have to reload.
So when it comes to having ARs around you for those purposes, obviously we're not always going to be in our home or be in a place where we are as prepared as we want to be. So where do you think that you should store your AR? I know that there are some people that like to have them with them everywhere they go. Discreet carry bags, whatever the case may be. I know there are some people that just basically have one wherever it is they might be, so there would be multiples. So there might be one at their office, or one in their car, or truck, one in their home. So where do you suggest one store an AR or a multitude of them for a SHTF situation?
If you're fortunate enough to own a multitude of them, yeah, have one wherever you can. Have one in the trunk of your car, the back of your truck. Have one at home. Have one in your bedroom. Have one in your, like me, I'm in a home office right now. I office out of my house. So wherever you can. But if you're like me and you only have two. I know some people have a lot more than that, but I'm one of the less fortunate. I only have two. Then portability becomes very important. I'm in the market right now for a discrete carry bag for mine, so that when I go, I'm in the business of providing products to hotels, which means I stay in a lot of hotels and I do a significant amount of traveling. So I'm looking for a discrete carry bag so I can take mine into a hotel room and people don't know I'm carrying my AR into the hotel.
We got to direct you to our podcast where we talked about discrete carry options.
I'm gonna go look that up and listen to that. But if you can do that, by all means do that, because an AR is such a great tool. Have one available as easy as you can.
Have you ever had much thought put into, or had your listeners discuss having an AR at an office where it might actually be the place of your employment? Even though it might be in the strictest sense legal because no one's put up a restrictive notice and it's okay under state law, and your employer hasn't really come out and said, okay, here's our policy. What's your stance, or what are the thoughts about actually taking an AR to your office?
Wow, I've never had a listener contact me and say that they keep an AR at their office. I've had a lot of them say that they have handguns but not ARs. Now, just because they haven't told me that doesn't mean that they don't, but I've never had a listener say that they do. I mean, I think it would be great if you can get away with it. Obviously, if you own the business, then you can get away with it because you give yourself permission to do so. But if you're working for somebody else, if they'll allow you to do that, sure, why not? That would be awesome. Because look at look what's going on out there. Look what's going on in workplaces. Look what's going on in public places, in churches, and in places where people work. I mean, yeah, why not?
Right.
I work in a urban environment here in Las Vegas. I mean, I work downtown Las Vegas. I'm not far from the Strip. What would you think, and thankfully enough, my work welcomes any type of firearms that walk through the door. There's a lot of show and tell that goes on. But what would you think would be the amount of rounds that you'd want to have stored with you in that situation, at work or in your truck, so to speak?
Okay. I'm going to disagree with probably a lot of people. You mentioned stored in your truck. Well, store as much as you can store. But with you, either on your person or in the gun, let's all be real. The people that think that 40 zombies are gonna descend upon or start attacking their workplace, people are living in fantasy land. I would seriously doubt that you're going to probably shoot more than the first magazine. I would seriously doubt that. Now, does that mean I'm saying only keep one magazine with you? No, keep more. But I would seriously doubt, even with an AR, that the conflict will last beyond you shooting, your first magazine of 28 or 30 rounds that you keep in it. Just my personal opinion.
Let me ask you this question then, Bob. So, based on your experience, the training you've attended, those that you've conducted, there is this, I guess, this understanding that in a high-pressure situation, we have problems with our sensory inputs. We have problems hearing, tunnel vision, the adrenaline dump, the heart beating. All of these things are going in to basically create a difficult situation which we have to overcome either with training or through whatever sheer willpower there is to get out and engage. And so the idea that engagements are typically very close, that engagements have a high number of missed shots, that very few hits. Is the AR in that situation one that lends itself better than a pistol to being able to adequately deploy it and utilize it for the intended purpose?
Better than the pistol? I don't know. It depends. That depends on how much somebody trains with one. As good as a pistol, sure. Yeah, I mean, and could you be better than it with your than with your handgun? Well, yeah, absolutely. Just because of everything good about a rifle, having an optic on it, and having a longer barrel and a longer sight radius if you're using your iron sights. So yeah, I think if you're training, it all comes down to training, in my opinion.
So is that the deciding factor, you really think, in the successful outcome of any encounter, an adequate amount of training?
Yeah, I do, because you brought it up earlier, Reed, about stress, about auditory exclusion, and the fact that you can't see well and you can't hear well. And when your heart rate goes up and your stress level goes up, your skill level actually goes down in most cases. And you have to learn how to manage that. I teach in my handgun classes that you've got to inoculate yourself against stress. And we do that in several different ways. We use shot timers. And there's other creative ways, and you can do the same thing with your rifle. If you take a rifle class, you should be taking a class from an instructor that is going to put you under stress, because that's probably what a real life encounter is going to be like.
Right.
And
well,
I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, you can go to the range and you can shoot nice 1.5-inch groups with your finely tuned AR, but the level of concentration and the level of time, you're probably not likely to be afforded either of those in a real defensive encounter. And those 1.5-inch groups that your rifle will do, or the 1-inch groups that your rifle will do, are probably going to expand to 5 or 6 inches when you're under stress.
So when we're talking about these encounters, would you think that these situations are going to be more direct engagements, or is there going to be some measure of stealth opportunism that's going to occur? So, for instance, in a bug-out situation, you run across somebody who has hostile intent. Is that a direct engagement? Is that a stealthy engagement? Is there something that you're trying to look for in terms of that kind of encounter? Your bug-in, is someone going to try to break through the front door, or is someone going to try to ambush you? I mean, these kinds of situations, do they lend themselves one way or the other in your considerations in terms of training, or is it just too broad of an area to kind of nail down?
No, I think it's not too broad. As a matter of fact, if you study what we call DGUs, defensive gun uses, both with rifles and handguns, you mentioned someone busting down your door and coming in your house. I mean, Reed, what do you think? What do you think is the most common weapon used when somebody busts in the door of a house? What's the most common defensive weapon used?
A baseball bat?
Yeah, if they don't have a gun, it's probably something like a baseball bat, tire iron, golf club, something like that, right?
Right.
But if it's a gun, it's 90% of the time a handgun. Why? Because a handgun is typically what people either have on their person or very close by.
Right. It's kind of hard to lean your rifle up against the dinner table and not have your wife scowl at you.
But you mentioned something like opportunists or ambush or a partial collapse. Okay, now we're talking about the AR-15 because now you might have advance notice. If there's a partial collapse or there's a weather event, if there's a bad weather event that causes chaos in your area for 7 to 14 days, okay, you've got advance notice now. And you know that there's going to be unprepared people, the guy next door that didn't prepare, and that he's desperate. And after about 4 or 5 days, I always say, desperate people will do desperate things during desperate times. And people that you never thought were going to be somebody that you have to defend yourself against, you might be finding yourself defending yourself against them. And okay, so now you got time to plan. So now load up your ARs, and I hope that you're trained with them and use those.
I think the thing that has always occurred to me in any thought process that I've had about the AR, the whole bug-out situation is one that concerns me because, in the ideal situation, I'm going to bug out, I'm going to take my firearms and my ammunition, I'm going to take spare magazines, spare parts, but, then where do you put them? Okay, so they're in a vehicle, What happens when it runs out of gas, or it gets a flat tire, or it gets 3 flat tires and you don't have enough spares, or somebody has shot out the engine and you're having to run like hell because whatever the case may be, now you're down to what you can carry. Maybe not even all of what you should have on you, but what you could just grab. And so that whole thought process really, to me, kind of negates the idea of that, higher level of mobility. And really, at that point, it's almost like you should prepare for, I need to be able to have on me what I need at a base level for this to be a viable option. And, I have 3 children. So, to me, that is almost an insurmountable obstacle. Is that kind of thinking what makes you be more of a bug-in adherent than a bug-out proponent?
Yeah, it is. Reed, earlier you said in the ideal situation. Well, since when is a self-defense situation ideal?
Right.
It rarely is ideal, and there's always going to be curveballs and things that you're not going to expect. And so yes, you may have to go portable. And so that's why I would much rather bug in if I absolutely possibly can. That's my first choice. If I have to go mobile, and then I want the greatest amount of portability as possible. And again, that's where I think the AR-15 shines, because out of almost any long gun that you could decide to pick for your self-defense, the AR-15 and its ammo and its magazines are probably the most portable, or one of the most portable.
Right, right. Well, let's kind of focus in on the rifle itself. We've talked about a number of different characteristics, but if we were going to assemble our rifle, let's talk about some of the characteristics that, the whole, hitting the fan situation really is going to demand from the rifle. So, in terms of reliability and as a function of its necessity, are you more on the spend every dollar you can, or on the, well, it's such a robust system, save some money for other important things?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say I'm probably in the middle. I'm not a big fan of going out and finding the cheapest AR you can possibly buy, because I think your chances of getting a real reliable weapon are a lot lower. Now, people might argue, and they might email you and say, that Bob guy is a nut, because I got this $499 AR that's never malfunctioned in the 50 rounds I've shot it. And note I said the 50 rounds that they've shot it.
Right.
But you don't also have to spend You don't have to take out a second mortgage either. To get a really good rifle. The ARs are so good these days. They're so good. Reed, back when you were, first getting into them, you probably had to spend some money, didn't you?
I took a big hiatus. By the time I got back into the rifles for myself, it had been a while since I'd handled them in the Marine Corps. And so, they were fairly reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But then we had a big incident and the prices shot through the roof. But kind of right in that sweet spot when I really got into them at the beginning and began this journey and acquired kind of the core of the things that we talk about on the show, they were reasonable.
Yeah.
Now, not so much, I would say.
But tell me if you think, this is my thinking, tell me if you agree. I think for $750 to $900 you can get a decent rifle.
I absolutely agree with you.
And you don't have, people think, oh, AR, I'm going to have to go spend $2,000 to $2,500. Well, you can. That's nice. Those are great to have. But if you're somebody that's on a budget, but you're looking for a long gun, something more than a handgun that's portable, I think $750 to $900. But I would kind of be really careful about the sub $500 ones, and I've seen them out there advertised.
Yeah, that's always something that really concerns me, because at the end of the day, there are manufacturers out there that can pound out the product all day long, and if they're not going to be the low-cost leader, what is that guy selling you where he can be the low-cost leader? I mean, that's the thing that concerns me.
Yeah. And another thing, go ahead, JD.
And you're controlling an explosion in your hands, so.
A nice explosion. And the same thing is true with a handgun. You're controlling an explosion that happens to be happening about 20 inches in front of your nose.
Right.
With a handgun. And same with a rifle. It's not very far from your face.
Well, let's talk about caliber. I mean, I think that we've really kind of focused on the 5.56. Do you think there is room for, say, the 300 Blackout, the 308, other specialty calibers when one considers this, or do you think it is better to stay with the broadest appeal in terms of what is available?
Well, I think it depends on what you want the rifle for. If you want it for a general home defense weapon that's easy to shoot and easy to train with, I would say stick with the 223 5.56, because not only can you find ammo just about everywhere, you can find all different types of ammo in that caliber everywhere right now. And it's not that expensive anymore. And by the way, folks, buy your ammo now. Buy it now, buy it now, buy it now. I can tell you in 6 to 7 months, there's going to be panic buying. I don't care who wins the election or who looks like it's going to win the election. There's always panic buying that leads up to every election. Buy it now. And I think in the 223 5.56 caliber, yeah, I think that's good for general. But if you want a competition gun and you like long range competition, like really long range competition, which I'm not into, but if people are, yeah, then maybe you don't want a 223. Maybe you want something else. Maybe you want the 300 Blackout. Maybe you want 308. Who knows?
So let's talk about weight.
Okay.
Does it matter or does it not matter?
Yeah, it matters. My doctor says I have to lose about 22 pounds, so it does. It matters a lot. That kind of weight. You mean weight in a rifle? You mean, right?
Right.
Okay. I'm a big fan of light rifles, and again, I'm not a real big guy, but I'm a huge fan of a light rifle. So many people like to just bolt all kinds of junk to their rifle. They'll load that sucker up, and it's 11 pounds by the time they get done with it. And I would love to see somebody, and maybe Reed, you got some experience with this, I'd love to see somebody carry that 11-pound rifle day in and day out for several days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'll tell you, you look at a U.S. Marine, he's going to carry an M16A4. You're looking at a Knight's Armament rail, a couple of rail covers. Probably got a laser designator, a light. Looking at his combat optic, So, and it's got a buttstock, so we're not talking about a collapsible stock in many instances.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a light rifle equipped in that fashion. I think that the rifles, it was somewhere like 8.5, maybe it was under 9 pounds when it was the A2. So I think you're probably talking about something that's closer to 10 pounds than 8. So yeah, I mean, I think there are plenty of people who have to work with one of those rifles, but that's a guy whose sole job is to work with that rifle. It's not a guy whose sole job it is to go out and sit behind a desk for whatever length of time they do in a day, and then not run and eat healthy and do all the things that soldier does. Well, they don't eat healthy, but so you're out of shape, and then you have to carry it. Well, that's not the best of all possible worlds.
Reed, thank you for your service to this country. I appreciate it. And one of my very best friends, Ben Branham, the host of the Modern Self-Protection podcast, he's a Marine also. And when we first started talking about ARs and M4s, I thought he was going to come to me and say, "Hey, Bob, you know what? You got to have every accessory known to man because that's what I used in Iraq." And you know what? He says, "No." He said, "What I used in Iraq, I ain't using on the street in San Antonio, Texas, where we live." He doesn't want. He wants as light as possible. And so I kind of followed him. I said, "Hey, keep it light. I got an optic on mine. I'm going to put a lightweight light on it, and I've got a foregrip, and that's about it. Otherwise, if I put more than that on it, it's getting too heavy for me."
Yeah, I tend to agree. Well, when you really talk about that situation with the soldiers, they're well supported. They're close to their support facilities, bases. So it's not like you're going to tell that guy, "Okay, put this kit on. We'll see you in 2 years." Carry it around for the next 2 years without, being able to be relieved or anything, and then come back and tell me what you think. It's a lot different, I think.
Yeah, and we civilians, we don't have backup. We don't have people resupplying us with ammo.
Yeah.
We don't have 15 Marines behind us that if we go down or our rifle goes down, we don't have backup. So have something light, have something that's reliable, and call it good.
So in terms of optics, do you have a preference on whether we're talking, a red dot, like a 1 to 4 power scope, a full-on 3x9, or better piece of glass? Where do you line yourself up in that spectrum of when is it just utilitarian enough and when is it too much?
Well, that's a good question. Again, it depends on. That's a tough question to answer. It depends on what you're going to use the AR for. If it's your competition rifle, go all out on the optic, I think. If you want to try to go win your local carbine or state rifle competition with an AR, yeah, go all out on the optic. But if it's going to be just a general purpose defense gun, I'm perfectly satisfied with a red dot. With a piece of glass red dot, I'm satisfied with that.
How about rails? Are they important or are they not important?
I think they're important. I got a key mod rail on my go-to rifle. I just because they're so easy. It's so easy to put stuff on and take it off of a key mod rail. If you can afford that, put it on. But if you can't, if you just get a regular AR with just the standard foregrip and no rail, I'm not going to say that you're a fool by not getting a fancy rail on it. It depends on what you want to use it for.
Right. Well, are you a fan of this progression from the quad rail to the key mod or the M-lock, where it's basically put a piece of rail wherever it is you need it, and the rest of it is just pared down as much as you can?
Well, yes, I'm a fan. I've got two different types of ARs. I've got one that's just got your standard foregrip with a flat top receiver that I put a flip-up rear sight on it, and it's got the standard A2 front sight, and that's kind of like my general all-purpose, go to the range, let somebody else shoot it, and let's go have fun with an AR-15 type of gun. And then my go-to has got the key mod rail on it, and just because, like I said, just because it's easy. And yes, I can put something wherever I feel like putting it. I like that.
So let's move on to iron sights. Are they important?
Now we're really getting into the weeds here, aren't we?
Tread lightly on this one, because iron sights is a very closely, dearly held topic for one of us that has hair.
It's a part of the AR-15 manifesto.
Okay, well here's my answer on that. I have two ARs. One has only a red dot optic, and the other has only iron sights. And I shoot both. I train with both. I plan to continue to shoot and train with both. And I think it's important that you know how to use both, because I think if you're only an optics person and it goes down, your optic goes down, what are you going to do? And people say, well, Bob, the optics are so good these days. They're so bulletproof, reliable. They never go down. Yeah, right, sure. And a BMW and Mercedes, they need repairs too, okay? So if you don't know, if you're not good with your irons and you've never done it before, you've always placed that red dot where you want the bullet to go and it goes there. If you don't have that red dot available, what are you going to do? You need to train with both.
And in a survival situation, or a get home, or a bug in, or a bug out, batteries may become scarce. You may knock it around trying to get home, so Reed's old-fashioned iron sights, and you'll hear Reed's voice if that situation ever comes out. Your rifle will actually project that voice that says, see, I told you should have had iron sights.
Well, and here's a suggestion for your listeners. If you only have one AR, have both. Have a red dot and co-witness it with iron sights, and one day go to the range and turn your red dot off and shoot with only your iron sights. And then the next time, do the opposite. If you've got sights that you can flip down, flip them down, don't use them, and shoot only with your red dot.
See, now you're preaching to the choir. I like that. That's good.
Yeah, there you go. Again, I got two. I got one set up with only an optic and one with only iron sights. I think it's important you can do both.
So, in terms of the potential of the AR-15, in the survival situation, in the situation of scarcity or whatever, what hunting characteristics would you want incorporated into your rifle? I mean, if it's going to be the source of taking down game or tonight's dinner, or protecting yourself from a beastie, what thoughts do you think present themselves in terms of the characteristics you'd want?
I got a couple thoughts on that. Here in South Texas, where I live, it is legal to hunt game with with a 22 caliber rifle, except for you can't hunt them with 22 long rifle. So in other words, the 223-556 is legal. Having said that, if I'm going to take my AR out, and in fact I'm going to use my go-to gun, because this one's actually chambered in 223 Wild, and I believe it's a 1-in-8 twist. And from what I understand, I haven't shot the real heavy loads out to about 100 yards yet, but I plan to soon. From what I understand, it's pretty accurate with heavy loads. And I would say if you're going to be hunting with your AR, look for something that's got a barrel that's going to have either a twist rate or it's going to be chambered, so that you can shoot heavier loads. Because I'd be wanting to shoot, like some 72 or 77 grain ammo, or maybe even some 80 grain ammo if I'm going to be hunting, especially if I'm going to be trying to take down large game.
Well, I kind of like that answer.
I mean, I don't want to go out there with my other one with a 1-in-9 twist 55 grain FMJs and try to bring down a buck. I mean, I'm not that good of a shot. If you're that good of a shot, well then fine, go do it. I'm not.
Let's talk about slings. Do you think a sling is an important characteristic or part of the consideration of any AR rifle in this circumstance?
I think a sling is mandatory.
Now, we're talking about kind of like the Marine Corps style sling, where you get to sling up and provide a good solid bone-on-bone, fundamentals of marksmanship, position, or are we talking like one of these Brownings, put it on your shoulder so that the weight doesn't really tire out your tender hands, kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
I can see you guys have had this discussion before. Why do I feel like I'm stepping on a landmine here talking about slings? I like the single point sling. I like the single point sling where it snaps on and it snaps off the rifle one spot, comes on and off in one spot. And I throw that thing over my shoulder, and it lets me shoulder the rifle quickly. It lets me let the rifle hang quickly or easily. And it's portable. I know some people like the 2-point slings. Whatever works for you, the single point sling works for me.
Well, and I think maybe it bears some discussion that we talked earlier about your perspective on kind of that typical engagement distance in the situation that. Excuse me, I was trying not to sneeze.
Yeah, that's
At that point.
So, in terms of that engagement distance, your thoughts are that we're really talking within 100 yards easily, in typically much shorter in an urban environment, which you think is where you would typically be operating. So, I mean, obviously, slinging up for a 600-yard shot isn't a practical consideration for that mindset. So,
No, I think, the FBI put out a report. I'll see if I can find it and send it to you, a link to it. And they determined that the average encounter that a civilian would encounter with a rifle is like 35 to 40 yards.
see, so that lends itself not to the ideology that I espouse, but I do understand the
Well, like I said, it depends on what you're going to use the rifle for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And like I said, I'm not into long range shooting.
In terms of light, or having a light on your rifle, where does that fit into your mindset?
I think it's very important. I don't have a light on my go-to right now, and I will soon. But I think it's very important. Just like a light on a handgun, a lot of people forget about that. Yeah, they're important, or at least have a light that you can bring into action. I mean, like I carry this flashlight all the time, and that's great when this Surefire is great when I'm carrying my handgun. But it's going to be kind of hard for me to shoot my AR and turn this light on at the same time.
Right.
So a light on my rifle, I think that's important. A sling is mandatory. A light is a strong suggestion.
Now, the next two items, I think, really, I think they evoke a whole lot of concern in the minds of a number of people simply because of what they are and some of the concerns that they would have for the kind of rifle that we're talking about. But we're talking about SBRs and suppressors, and so when you're talking about governmental issues, you're talking about perhaps a situation where someone is going to not be very happy that you have either one of these.
Yeah.
But in terms of the SBR, do you think that is something that is important enough in your consideration to compel people to go out and go through the process of SBRing their AR?
If you'd have asked me that question 2 years ago, I would say no, it's not very important. But I've changed. I've kind of changed my mind. I think I'm going to do that just because I firmly believe that we're not going to have that right much longer.
So the next one is the suppressor. And so I think, to me, this kind of directly impacts either the bug out or bug in situation in terms of basically having something that can be fired at will in close quarters with the least amount of detrimental effect to our hearing. And so in terms of your thoughts on the suppressor, how important is having a suppressor to the idea of having a rifle that is completely adequate for any hitting the fan situation?
Well, anybody that has fired an AR indoors, especially a short-barreled AR indoors, they know how loud that is. And if you're listening to this and you've never done it, go do it. Go fire a magazine indoors with a short-barreled AR and tell me what you think. They're loud, so yeah, suppressor would be really nice. The downside is it makes the rifle longer.
Right.
So I mean, in terms of portability, it's kind of starting to defeat the purpose a little bit. I mean, so. That's an interesting choice. That's an interesting question that you ask. I think it's nice to have it suppressed, and that's one of the disadvantages of an AR is the noise. But also, I think a 12 gauge is just as loud.
Well, I think we've kind of run to the end of our list of things to wring out of you, Bob. I do appreciate you being a good sport. Well, we really want to share the information that you've been able to gather with the listeners. JD, do you have any questions for Bob that I didn't cover?
No, looking back at it, no. I think here's what I'd like to propose a question to the three of us as we wrap this up. If you were building your, SHTF rifle, what would it entail? Just a real quick rundown on what you would throw into it. So, Reed, I'm going to start with you.
I'm thinking that we're talking about something with a short barrel, so we're talking an SBR since I won't go the pistol route. It's got to have a suppressor. There are a number of shorter options out there, and with a short enough barrel, you can really get it kind of underneath that 16-inch length. So, a 6.5-inch suppressor with an 8-inch barrel puts you in at, 14.5 inches. That's an M4. And, in terms of optics, I think, certainly there's any number of red dots and ACOGs that are more than adequate. But I do think that you should have irons on the rifle at all times so that you can drop that mount off and go without it if you need it.
A quick detach, huh?
Yep.
So, Bob, what do you think?
I guess I would say I'm not as much of a fan of an SBR as Reed is, but I see nothing wrong with it. If I was going to build one up, I would probably build up a mid-length, kind of like the setup I've got now with 14.5-inch barrel, and buy it so that it's legal, so you don't have to get an SBR if you don't want to. I'm a big fan of having some kind of an optic on it, but I'm a big fan of co-witnessing the irons with a red dot optic so that you can use both if you want. The question of piston versus gas impingement, take your pick. I got one of each, and they're both great. So I would probably I'd probably get the quality that I want and not worry so much about the operation of it and how it operates, but just as long as I'm willing to get good quality, maintain it well, and a light, a good light, good optic. And by the way, something we didn't talk about earlier, good magazines.
Oh, yeah.
Good magazines. That's the problem with any semi-automatic weapon. I don't care what it is. Handgun, there are some magazine-fed shotguns, but mostly handguns and rifles. Good magazines.
I'd say for mine, I'm going to be biased and lead towards a SBR and 300 blackout.
Yeah.
And suppress it. I may have one in my safe that's 10.5 inches on the barrel length, so adding a suppressor there would get me around just over 16 inches. I would do Reed commemorative iron sights. I'd get them custom engraved. I would put a sling on it. I don't know what sling. I haven't jumped into that debate yet. But I'd probably do something like just a simple, vortex prism or something like that I could put on it and get it banged around a little bit, because this rifle would probably be transported with me to and from work, secured in a vehicle, secured in my office, and I'd probably also make sure that along with the regular PMags and stuff, I'd probably make sure I had that D60 loaded up and ready to go. I don't work in the greatest part of Las Vegas, so if there's
you must not.
if there's any unrest, it could really get interesting. The front of the building's all glass, so I mean, it wouldn't take much to come through the door. So that D60 would be quite a comfort.
I forgot to mention the sling, but yeah, I think mine's just an inexpensive Magpul single point sling.
Well, that's just fun.
Yeah.
Well, hey, JD, why don't you read us out, and we'll go ahead and close down this podcast, and then we'll see if we can't get Bob to agree to come back and talk to us again.
Okay. If you would like to find out more about Bob Mayne and his shows, you can check them out at todayssurvival.com, also at handgunworld.com. You can find those links in the show notes for episode 167 or 168. Pardon me, got a little behind myself, of the AR-15 podcast. Don't forget, Otis Technology teaming up with us once again. We're excited to see what 2016 looks like with Otis. We've also got shows coming down the pipe. Looks like we're going to be talking to Aero Precision and some others. Also have RTT set up. They're doing the Cerakote job right now on the 9mm New Frontier AR 9mm carbine giveaway. You can find the sign up for that in the show notes of any of the recent shows. Also at facebook.com/AR15 podcast. You can send questions, comments, hate mail to read at AR15.podcast@gmail.com. That's AR15.podcast@gmail.com. Or if you love Iron Sights too, I'm sure you'd love to hear that. Subscribe and listen to the AR-15 podcast for free on iTunes or Stitcher. Leave us a review so the show can place higher. You guys do a great job of that. Share your pictures on Instagram at AR-15 podcast, or tag your pictures with the same hashtag. You can visit us at Facebook, facebook.com/AR-15 podcast. Make sure you check out the other podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network. Use the Brownells and Amazon affiliate links by going to the network's homepage. That's firearmsradio.tv. And you can click on the AR-15 podcast link to get the sign up for that 9mm carbine giveaway. And with that, Bob Mayne and the SHTF AR-15 rifle episode in the books, Reed.
All right. Well, Bob, once again, thank you so much for coming and joining us. And listeners, we'll be back with you once again next week.
This has been a production of the Firearms Radio Network. You can find more information at firearmsradio.tv.